Hello there, my name is Chris Perkins, and I'm the Engineer and Environmental Specialist for the CE Division here at ADECA. In this video, I'll cover the basics for the Environmental Review Guide. We'll look at the different sections of the guide as well as some hidden tips and tricks. So let's get started. As you may remember, in a previous video, I asked you guys to bookmark the CED Environmental Review webpage. Whether you did or not, it's up to you. Get to the webpage though, so we can go over the Environmental Review Guide. The Environmental Review Guide is found just below the instructions section, and it has its own hyperlink. Now, on the screen, you can see that there are two different files listed here. The first one is the Environmental Review Guide. The second is the Environmental Review Process Flowchart. Each of them has a revision date with them that provides you of when the latest update occurred and generally what kind of information was updated. Now, the first thing we're going to look at, even though it's second on the list, is the Environmental Review Process Flowchart. And I'm really only going to show you this so that you can see that the entire review process has been broken down in picture form so that you can print this and use this as a quick reference guide. Now, it does not provide you with a whole lot of detail about how to actually complete the forms and conduct the reviews and things of that nature, but it does at least give you the process that you're going to need to follow from start to finish for each of the different review types. So feel free to use this, print it, use it as needed, mark it up, make notes. And down here at the bottom, I have two notes that go along with it. The ENV ORC form, or what we call the other requirements checklist, it's required to be completed for every level of review, as well as the level of review determination form, or the ENV LRD form. They are required for every level of review. So, in a nutshell, that is the environmental review process in flowchart form. Again, feel free to use this as you see fit. Now, the next item we'll look at is the Environmental Review Guide itself. The Environmental Review Guide was put together in order to assist you in conducting your environmental reviews. In it, it has a collection of information and links to different forms, websites, documentation styles, anything and everything I could think of to help make this review process for you easier. That is the name of the game when it comes to me. I like to work smart, not hard. So I put together this entire guide for you so that you could work smart and not hard. First page is just the title page, lets you know what you're getting into. Second page is a table of contents where you can jump quick if you need to, if you know where you're headed. On page 3, well, technically page 2, you have an introduction section. It goes through the different requirement processes and different things that are required under the NEPA rules, HUD rules, and everything that it pertains. It gives you a little rundown of a few things. So go ahead and read through the introduction section. Probably won't have to read through it more than once. The next section, section 1, is the levels of review section. And as you can see here, the first portion lists to you the 5 levels of review. I have them in order based on the regulation number. So exempt, which is 5834, categorically excluded subject to 58.5, which is 5835A, categorically excluded not subject to 58.5, that's 5835B, environmental assessment 5836, and environmental impact statement 58.37. Now that doesn't necessarily indicate the level of scrutiny that you have to go through with each type of review. If you wanted to look at it in that format, it's actually exempt not subject to, subject to, environmental assessment, environmental impact statement. That's the order of scrutiny or intensity of level of review that we go through. Why the regs weren't written that way, I don't know, but this is the way they were written. So that's why our number scheme follows this particular process. You can see right here in this little paragraph below, it says that the level of review a project is subject to is determined by the activities that are planned for the project. So depending on what activities you are doing, that determines your level of review. Those regulations are at 24 CFR Part 58, 34, 35, 36, and 37. Here is a hyperlink. Click on this word here. You can click and it will actually take you to those federal laws and regulations. We're not going to read through them, but you can find them right there on that hyperlink. Now, once you've made the determination of what level of review you are to conduct, the next portion gives you the list of forms that are to be completed and a short, brief explanation of what types of activities those are. So the first one obviously is exempt. The second section is categorically excluded subject to 58.5. Now keep in mind there are two different outcomes with this particular level of review. Your project does have the ability to convert to exempt if you wind up finding no mitigation measures through the statutory checklist, but you won't know that until you complete the categorically excluded subject to form. So until you've completed that form, you won't know which direction to go. Third is the categorically excluded not subject to list of forms. It actually spans 2 pages here. You can see that there's only 3 forms to be completed in this particular review. Next up is the environmental assessment. And as you can see, there are up to 6 forms that have to be completed and submitted. Keep in mind, along with these forms that you are completing, to the right, I have a suggested dating process. Your dates are very important as when these forms and everything are signed and executed. It's very important to make sure your dates are correct. If you follow this particular scheme here, then you shouldn't have any issues. And as always, I suggest if you're not sure, call me before you do anything. That way we don't waste any time. If you publish or post a notice and the dates are incorrect, you may wind up having to redo it. And that can cost you from anywhere from 7 to 18 days, depending on what type of notice it was. And it could cost you somewhere in the neighborhood of $1,500 if you had to run it in the newspaper. So be mindful of your dating scheme. It's one of the most important things we have to deal with. Next up is the environmental impact statement section. We don't talk about this in our reviews because, number one, we don't generally put enough money into a project because we don't have it. That would amount to the amount of work to be done to require an environmental impact statement. So if you start reviewing your process and you think you need to do an environmental impact statement, you need to stop and call me because chances are you're doing something wrong. So we don't generally cover it very much. All right, the next section, section 2, is the other requirements checklist. Now, as I said earlier, the other requirements checklist is required for every single project. So you have to cover these 3 requirements no matter what type of project you're doing. Now, some of the little tricks that I've thrown into here is these titles are hyperlinked to web pages. And if you ever come across a hyperlink that's busted, please just send me an email and let me know. That way I can have it fixed and updated on the internet. So when you click on the other requirements at 58.6 tab, it takes you to the related federal laws and authorities that HUD has available on the HUD Exchange. Now you can click on each one of these and it takes you to a more detailed description of the topic and how to better document it. All right. underneath that hyperlink, you'll see that there's a little blurb about why they're required and how to achieve compliance. The first regulation that we run into is flood insurance. Now, luckily for us, these regulations don't apply to HUD-assisted projects that come in the form of formula grants. And that is, as far as I understand, that's all of our programs under CED. We are all formula grants, formula-based grants, and so that's all of our CED programs. That's CDBG, ESG, ARC, HOPWA, the COVID money. If I'm leaving anyone out, I'm sorry, but those funding sources, they are all formula grants. So the requirement to process the flood insurance regulation is not required for our particular grant situation. Therefore, I have already pre-filled out that particular regulation on the ORC form. Next up is your coastal barrier resources. Again, you can hyperlink any of these titles and it takes you to the web page. It gives you the background information and the introduction as to why it's required or how it came about. And then it also gives you some guidance on how to make the determination whether or not this regulation applies to your project. And lastly, it gives you a compliance and documentation examples. Now, these are the same examples that we use in our monitoring checklist. This is exactly where I pulled them from. So there's nothing new to any of you who've been doing this for a while. Now, they have included here more recently Coastal Barrier Resources worksheets. They have their worksheet and the partner worksheet, which we would be the partners, the states, the cities, the towns. We would be the partner with HUD. It's what their monitors use when they come out to monitor to make sure that we have documented everything correctly. Now, for the most part, I have gone through these, and our documentation either meets or exceeds what they require in nearly every instance. So, Coastal Barrier Resources, like I said, is the second regulation that's found there. And this gives you a little background real quick, and then it takes you step by step on how to document properly, make the determination whether or not this regulation is applicable, and then how to document your concurrence with that regulation. And at the end of each one of these little sections, you can see that there is a couple of bullet points that give you links to examples or standard maps that you can use. In this particular case, we will look at this one. It's the proximity map. You open this file, and this is what we use as the Coastal Barrier Resources proximity map. So you can mark your project off on this location, and you have documented completely the Coastal Barrier Resources preference. It also has a website that you can do if you want to get more detailed. Next up is the airport hazards. And again, like I said, all of these you can click on, and they should take you to those guidance at the HUD Exchange. And again, it walks you through how to properly document the airport hazards. The third section of the review guide is the statutory checklist. Now, this statutory checklist consists of the 14 regulations that we have to document and comply with for categorically excluded subject to levels of review, as well as environmental assessment levels of review. This statutory checklist is found on both of those forms, and each of the different regulations is listed here, as well as in my opinion, the easiest route to complying with those mitigations or with those regulations. We won't go through all of them. I will just show you that they are here. Historic preservation spans a couple of different pages. So same thing, tribes is here, floodplain management. They're all here. Feel free to look through them at your leisure. I do suggest, though, that you use this as your guide on how to document everything correctly. All right, we are going to make it all the way down to section 4. Section 4 are the notices. So when conducting your environmental reviews, if you have to conduct a categorically excluded subject to, that's a CEST, or an environmental assessment, that's an EA, you are required to give public notice. For a CEST level of review, you are required to give the notice of intent, or the NOI, as I call it. So if you were doing a CEST level review, then this section here is the section that you're most concerned with. This gives you the required notices that you have to make, and the comment periods that go along with them. Now, the first one, and this is for either level of review, is a early notice of public review for a proposed activity in a floodplain or wetland, also referred to as the early notice. Now, when it comes to floodplains and wetlands, you have to publish them in the newspaper. And it has to be published for only 1 day, so you do not have to run it for a week. You just have to run the ad one time in the newspaper. And you must have a 15-day comment period minimum. And it has to be 15 full days. I will cover more when I do the notices video on how to count those days. The second type of notice that you may have to have is a final notice and public explanation of a proposed activity in a floodplain or wetland, also called the final notice. This also must be published in the newspaper, again, only once, but it must show up for at least 1 day, and it carries a minimum of a 7-day comment period, 7 full days. Again, we'll cover more on how to count those days when I do the notices video. And then the notice that applies to a CEST level of review is the notice of intent. It's also referred to as the notice of intent to request release of funds. A lot of word salad going on here because those are the names. It's not easy to keep up with. You just have to push through. So the notice of intent, though, you have the option to publish or post. You can post it in the newspaper or publish it in the newspaper. No, I'm sorry. You can post it at the localities, around the localities, or you can publish it in the newspaper. The notices of intent, though, has a 7-day comment period if you run it in the paper, or a 10-day comment period if you post it. And as a added bonus, your notice of intent and your final floodplain notice or wetland can be disseminated simultaneously, so they can run concurrently and their comment periods can overlap. All right, when you have a environmental assessment level of review, again, same thing with the early floodplain and final floodplain notices. Exact same thing, they apply exactly the same. The only difference is you will be using a combined notice instead of the notice of intent. And the combined notice actually consists of the FONSI, finding of no significant impact, and the notice of intent to request release of funds. If you use the combined notice, you don't have to do those 2 individual postings. You just do it at once. Again, this can be published or posted. It's completely up to you. If you publish it, it carries a 15-day comment period. And if you post it, it carries an 18-day comment period. So those are your 2 different types of notices that you have to give. And again, they're completely dependent upon what level of review you are conducting. I have had many a times where someone has grabbed the wrong notice and used it in lieu of the other one to do their public notifications. And sometimes it's okay, A lot of times it's not. So please be wary of you using the correct one. If you're not sure, call, email, it doesn't matter, just let me know. At the bottom here of the notices section, we do have a public notice distribution list. There are a couple of instances in which you are required to send a copy of your notice to different organizations, kind of as an FYI, like for your information only type of deal. And here in the top portion of these two, I think there's a couple of pages. The top portions of these two pages, they give you the instances in which you are supposed to contact the different individuals, and with which type of notices you're supposed to send them. And this is for floodplain and wetland notices. And this is a sample letter that you can send along with the notice. And basically all it says is, this is kind of an FYI. You don't have to do anything. We're just required to send you this information. And this is whenever you send out your early notice, whenever you send out your final floodplain or wetland notice. This is the distribution list for combined notices. So when you've done an environmental assessment, an EA level of review, these are the people you're supposed to contact and send a copy to. And here's your combined notification letter. Again, it says basically the same thing. We're just letting you know because we're required to. So please make sure you're complying with this portion of the regulation. Not everyone remembers to do that. And finally, we have the monitoring section. Here, basically, we're just informing you that all projects are subject to being monitored, and every project that gets monitored will have their environmental review monitored as well. Now, there are actually two different types of monitoring when it comes to these projects. One is the desk review, which I conduct for CEST and environmental assessment levels of review. So when you've submitted a 2A level of review or a 4 level of review, I do a desk review where I check off to make sure all your dates are correct and everything is signed and everything is notarized. Everything has all the required parts to it. That's what I'm checking there. The second type of review we have is the on-site review, and that is where our monitors will come out and check your ERR file, your environmental review record, your file, from stem to stern, front to back, to make sure that everything you're required to have is in that folder. And of course, you can see samples of what these two things look like by clicking on the hyperlinks. This is the on-site environmental review checklist. Most of you are familiar with it unless you're new to the program. And some of you may have never actually seen the desk review. And this is what the desk review looks like. This is what I go through whenever you submit your 2As and 4s. This is what I review. Well, that wraps up this video on Environmental Review Guide Basics. I am Chris Perkins. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to call or email, and we'll see if we can help you out. Thank you.